Hi there, it's Ted Rall coming to you from the American political left, or whatever's left of it. Here to talk about the current situation in Gaza. Victimhood or vengeance. You gotta choose one. You can't have both. Israel's about to learn that. Supporters of the Israeli government, as opposed to Israel writ large, which includes millions of Israelis who actually distrust their government. Did you know that only 4% of Israelis currently trust Netanyahu to tell them the truth about the war in Gaza? It's pretty crazy. Anyway, supporters are asking, why are so few people still talking about October 7th? It is striking and in some ways shocking that the brutality of the slaughter has receded so quickly in the memories of so many. That's something that Tony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, said over a month ago. If anything, it's only gotten worse since then. Hamas's attack was indeed vicious. It claimed 1,200 victims. It was so recent. How can it be that those kidnapped posters that we've seen all over the place are falling so flat, being ignored, being torn off, and ignored while they're being torn off the wall? Well, you can blame Benjamin Netanyahu and his co-conspirators in the Israeli war cabinet. They decided to choose vengeance over victimhood. They did have a choice. Instead of gleefully indulging themselves in an unseemly orgy of destruction and murder after Hamas killed all those Israelis and took 240 more as hostages, Israel's government could have decided to embrace the role of a victim. They could have cried. They could have expressed confusion. They could have played witness to the personal stories of the dead and the lost. They could have begged Hamas to return all the people it kidnapped. They would have had to do no bombs, no invasion, no psychotic rants about human animals, no banners as occurred in Tel Aviv that hanging from overpasses that scream "Zero Gazans." Talk about genocide. No, they would have had to turn the other cheek. Now, they could have done a precision act of violence. They could have raided Hamas's leadership. They could have tried to rescue the hostages, sort of like the way Jimmy Carter did during the Iran hostage crisis, hopefully with more success. But they didn't do that. They went the other way. So if Israel had chosen not to attack Gaza in a wholesale campaign of destruction, so brutal that historians have already decided that it's one of the most destructive in the history of warfare, in human history, Israel would continue to have a lot of sympathy and a lot of support around the world. But let's not forget, before the IDF saturation bombing campaign began back on October 8th, the world had pretty much forgotten the Palestinians. Arab states were normalizing relations with Israel. The Saudis were talking about normalizing relations, pretty big deal considering how far radical Wahhabi Islamist they are. Nobody really cared about them, so they were being forgotten, and that's part of the reason Hamas decided to launch the attacks. These days, UN resolutions, if there hadn't been a counterattack by Israel, would certainly have been directed against Hamas, not against Israel. The liberation movement for the people of Palestine was dead and gone, and the October 7th would have absolutely killed it. These days, you'd see Israeli flags all over the place, where in the same way that you used to see Ukrainian ones a year ago. Buildings would be lit up white and blue instead of yellow and blue. But here's the thing. When you want to play the victim, it does come with a downside, like you can't ethnically cleanse 2 million Palestinians who you've always hated and wanted to be killed, and whose land you have long coveted. And you look weak. I mean, look, everybody understands it. War is fun, and if you're Benjamin Netanyahu, it keeps you in office even when you're facing prison time for being corrupt. Not to mention, there's 141 square miles of prime beachfront real estate. That's a big land grab. But vengeance, as Israel is learning, is not without its own costs. Israel has the right and the duty to defend itself, but this is not that. We're hearing that linguistic construction a lot these days, notably from careful politicians and pundits whom, before the war, would have omitted that qualifier phrase, even allowing for the president's imprecise command of English, to say the least, Joe Biden's complaint that Israel was engaged in indiscriminate bombing, of course, using mostly American bombs, and Biden wants to send more of them, $60 billion worth, was pretty remarkable. Now, Israel has now used 2,000-pound bombs to kill 20,000 Gazans and make 2 million homeless by turning Gaza into an uninhabitable wasteland, all while penning them inside this death zone where they can't escape, subject to typhoid, cholera, and mass famine, because Israel refuses to let food or medical supplies into the territory, which, of course, they have occupied and subjugated for many, many decades. Now, here's the thing. If October 7th was a horror, and it was a horror, a disgusting horror, what Israel has wrought ever since is that horror hundreds of times more. There must easily be 100,000 dead Palestinian bodies buried underneath all those piles of rubble. We didn't forget October 7th at all. Israel forgot it. They eclipsed the Hamas attack. They erased it. They overreacted. They over-responded. They sacrificed their own hostages to their war aims so thoroughly that they even shot 3 of them when they managed to escape and were shouting at the IDF in Hebrew. We're not forgetting October 7th as much as we're just following Israel's lead. Now, the U.S. made a similar call after 9/11. I wouldn't really call it a mistake as much as a conscious decision. But for the most part, with the exception of those mawkish, never forget, yellow ribbon grief porn that we still see on police stations in places like New York, and those oversized pickup trucks driven by a certain type of MAGA right-winger, Americans have accepted the erasure of their 3,000 dead in New York, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Washington in exchange for the mindless purposefulness of the global war on terror initiated by George W. Bush and continued by Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden, and is now being used to justify everything from invading Afghanistan to arming Yemen against the Houthis, which most Americans couldn't find on a map. But unlike our allies, the whiny Israelis, at least we Americans know better than to try to ask the world why the world forgot us. Why'd they forget 9/11? We forgot 9/11. We made our choice, and now we live and we kill with it. We are all Americans, Le Monde editorialized on 9/12. But we were like, thanks but no thanks, fuckers. We'll kill anywhere, and freedom fi, you wimps. We do not care. At least we have that much class. We own our thug life. We're totally good with the fact that the world hates us more than ever before in the history of international polling. Meanwhile, that giant ripping sound, that's Israel's blank check being torn up. The whining is what happens when you keep doing the same thing while the world is changing all around you, and then you complain about it. Since 1948, Israel has had us to fund and arm them while running interference for them over at the United Nations, no matter how much land they stole from the Palestinians or how many Palestinians they killed, and no matter how lopsided the death counts were. After October 7th, it was only natural that the Israelis assumed that they could just keep doing whatever they wanted the way they always had been. And Joe Biden confirmed their assumption. And what do you expect? I mean, the dude is 81 years old. Obviously, he is stuck in his ways. But it's been a nice run, but it's done now. Israel no longer controls the narrative. It doesn't matter that Al Jazeera is censored on American cable channel companies, because you can get the footage from their great reporting from Gaza anywhere on social media, or for that matter, if you want to, you can stream it through your website, through a browser. Israel is no longer a special country considered to be admirable because it's a safe haven for Holocaust survivors, because the Holocaust survivors are pretty much all dead and gone. For millennials and the Zoomers, Israel is just one more country, albeit an anachronistic, uncomfortable vestige of the settler colonial era with a major stank of apartheid. Israel's star is sinking. Sympathy for the vengeful peaked out back in the 1970s when Dirty Harry and Death Wish were popular films, when violent retribution was expected, accepted, and even admired following an unprovoked wrong. But now, lashing back is as passé as old white men. Israel's a young country, and like a teenager, it wants to have things both ways, both to be loved and to be feared. But now that it has destroyed Gaza, love is off the table. if Israel is lucky, it will retain a few of its former allies as tolerant frenemies. That might include the United States. It might not include countries like France. Emmanuel Macron has made that pretty clear. If you want to be admired these days, you got to get yourself some victimhood status. Think about affirmative action, the politics of transgenderism, income tests for government benefits that are unrelated to poverty. Societal benefits in this world accrue to those who are perceived to have been oppressed, repressed, tortured, traumatized, brutalized by those with power, wealth, and strength. Who does that make you think of in the Middle East? That's Israel, the only country with nuclear weapons, and they have immense power to repel any and all enemies, even if they all attack at once. After Palestinians exchanged their violent Palestinian Liberation Organization of the 1970s for their impotent Palestinian Authority under occupation, the left around the world started to embrace their cause. October 7th was a shocking throwback, actually, to the 1970s and 1980s, attacks like the Munich Massacre and the hijacking of the Achille Lauro. And if it had been left just like that, this might have shifted victimhood and that perception back to the Jewish state, at least for some time. But that just didn't happen because Netanyahu's gang decided to reject the idea of self-restraint and indulge instead in ultraviolence and opportunism. Israel is a country whose architecture, aesthetics, and fashion is famously stuck in the 1970s. Watch that Adam Sandler film, Don't Mess with the Zohan, if you don't know what I mean. Now, they're paying a price for their failure to grasp 21st century reality. These days, it's a lot better to have people feel sorry for you than to be afraid of you. I'm Ted Rall from the left. Thank you so much for listening. You can check out more of my stuff all over the place. You could just Google my name, but I have a website, rall.com. That's RALL.com. Take care and happy holiday.